Okay, one thing I forgot to say, or we forgot to say, for sort of a commercial interruption is, as I go through this, if those of you watching the video would like a chart of my 6-stage structure to follow along, if you look down underneath the video, there should be a link there that goes to some version of my website, storymastery.com. If you click that, it'll link through so you can find out how we will send you a free copy of the chart that you can download, so you can just follow along with these 6 stages if you like as we go through them. So there, free of charge. Isn't that cool? Okay, so I was leaving off at the end of the first 2 stages, the setup and the new situation. Before we go on to the hero's pursuit of this goal, though, I want to talk a bit about the inner journey for the character. What I mean by the inner journey is that while the outer journey is a journey of accomplishment, it means at the plot level of the movie, at the surface level, is about a character who wants some visible goal. There's a visible finish line that that character wants to cross. So in the case of A Few Good Men, he wants to get them off of this murder charge. He starts out wanting to get a good reduced sentence, and then he'll end up wanting to get an acquittal. So that's his goal, and it's going to carry us all the way from the beginning of Act 2 to the climax. But if you go deeper with the character to what I call the inner journey, it is a journey of transformation. And now we're talking about how the character changes through the course of the story. It's a transformation actually from living in fear to living courageously. And so in stage 1, in the setup, when you first meet the hero, one of the things you want to notice is this hero will always be stuck in some way. Well, we, the audience or the reader, will get a sense that there's something that the character is just tolerating. They're not really living fully. They're not living a fulfilled life. They're not being all they can be, if you will. And we can see when we meet Kaffee that he's kind of there. He's just very flippant about things. He's not committed to anything. We find out, it's sort of subtly presented at first, but his father was a great lawyer who became the Attorney General of the United States before he passed away. Drops a little hint of something might be going on more than just he's a hotshot attorney. But he is stuck in this way. That's going to be the first indication of his arc, his transformation. Now, to understand how the transformation for a character works, you need to ask yourself a few things about the character. And the first of those is, what is the character's wound? How is this character wounded in the past? A wound could be a painful event. It could be an ongoing situation. But in any case, it's something painful that the hero or the character who is going through the arc believes they've dealt with. If you ask them, they would say, no, that's in the past. I'm over that now. It doesn't have any effect on me. But we can see, and we will learn, that it affects them greatly. Because when we are wounded in real life, just as when a character is wounded or has been wounded at the start of a movie, then that traumatic event is going to generate a belief about how the world works, a belief about how people will behave in certain situations. Just some kind of belief, it's always a limiting belief of in some way, connected to that pain. So, because his father was so successful, and apparently had a lot of expectations of him, and because he died before Kaffee was too old, because he's not that old even in the movie now, that was his wounding experience. And the belief that came out of that is the belief that he is not good enough. He can't match up with his father, with the memory of his father. We might not realize that watching the movie just this far, just in the first act, but there are lots of hints that are going to be dropped, as I will point out in a second. But once the character has this belief that they ingrain subconsciously, they aren't aware that this wound has anything to do with it, then that belief is going to create a fear of replicating the pain that they suffered in the past in a way. So if he believes he's not good enough to match up with his father, then his fear is ever having to go into a courtroom. Because as soon as he actually does a trial, whatever, however you say that, as soon as he really becomes a real lawyer and really defends someone in a court of law, then everybody's going to see that he's not as good as his father was, and that would be too painful for him. So what a character does to avoid this fear that grows out of this belief, that stems from this wound in the first place, is the character will create what I call an identity. That's sort of the money idea in all of this. By identity, I mean a persona. The character will create a false self, a mask that they present to the world. It's a mask that they're not aware is a mask. They think it's who they truly are. But this will succeed at protecting them from experiencing the pain or the fear that grew out of that belief that came from the wound a long time ago. So what does Caffey do? He says, well, if I am not going to meet up with if I'm not going to match my father, if it's going to be very painful and scary for me to go into a courtroom, I won't do it. So he becomes the great plea bargainer. And there's even a time when Weinberg says he's considered one of our best attorneys because he successfully plea bargained 42 cases in 60 days or something like that. Like that's a claim to fame, which I assume it is, but it shows this guy's identity is, I don't go into a courtroom, I just figure out the best way to plea bargain and I'm very good at it, so I get the best plea I can for my client. So that's the identity he is fully in stage one. And in stage two, he's going to stay in that identity, but he's going to get a glimpse of what living in what I call his essence might be. The essence being what would be left if you stripped away this false self. It's who the character has the potential to become. And what's his glimpse? His glimpse is when he meets Galloway and then he meets his defendants. Because Galloway, there's a line where she says, be careful when you go down to Gitmo, they're very fanatic. Those Marines there are very fanatic. And Weinberg says, about what? And she says, about being Marines. And then when he meets his clients, they say, we have a code and an honor, and that's what they live by. And it will come to a point where they don't even want a plea bargain because it would go against their code. This is him getting a glimpse of what being true to oneself might be. He has no code, he has no honor at all. He's just slick. What does she call him? A bargain basement bazaar kind of hustler as an attorney. But that's all his identity. But to be in his essence would mean he'd have to find a code. He'd have to find his truth. He'd have to be closer to his defendants who live that way. And there are lots of hints about that in stage two. He goes in and he says to Galloway, she says, you've got to defend them. And he says, from what I understand, these guys don't need a lawyer, they need a priest, making one of his flippant remarks. And her response is, no, they need a lawyer. And that line will be repeated many times. Are you going to be a lawyer? Are you going to be a lawyer? Because that's her shorthand for, are you going to do what you have the potential to do? Or are you going to just fall back on your usual, hotshot plea bargain sort of basis? And that brings up one other thing about Galloway, and that is she is one of his reflection characters. That's just the jargon, the term I use for a character who's aligned with the hero. Remember, the hero has a visible goal that they want to achieve. The reflection is the character is going to help that hero achieve the goal. She and Weinberg are both reflections because they're both there to help him get that reduced sentence or that acquittal. But on the inner journey level, it's the character who is going to point out the inner conflict to the hero, hold the hero's feet to the fire, and every time the hero is retreating into his safe identity, is going to say to him, this isn't you. In this case, it's her saying, you need to be a real lawyer and stop falling back on your usual identity.